Welcome to Nexdigm podcast. My name is Sundar and I lead the forensic services at Nexdigm. Our podcast today is part of Corporate Ethics and Compliance Week series. Our podcast is an endeavor to bring up emerging topics of relevance for executives across spectrum of services we offer. These are short conversations with deep real insights, and we hope you enjoy listening. The world is changing rapidly. Amidst the woes of current pandemic, business reorganization and fund management has taken a center stage, while multinationals are attempting to regain commercial strength. With business pressures, cost crunches, and limited familiarity with digital management of business, employees, and business partners, ethics and compliance officers have a critical and important role. Ethics and compliance do not get limited to concern hotline, awareness training, and third-party due diligences or monitoring compliance metrics. Ethics and compliance to us has a greater responsibility towards establishing organizational culture, epitomizing values, exhibiting transparency, enumerating strategy, and enhancing communication while embedding sustainability. In this context, we bring together voices of 6 women leaders across geographies to share insights on culture, values, transparency, strategy, communication, and sustainability. I'm pleased to have Amii Barnard-Bahn as part of this series. Amii is a consultant to C-suite leaders at global companies like Bank of West, Zimmer Biomed, Adobe, and Decap. She is recognized as one of the top coaches for legal and compliance executives, member of Marshall Goldsmith's 100 Coaches. Amii guest lectures at Stanford, UC Berkeley, and is a contributor to Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and Compliance Week. She is also a fellow at Harvard Institute of Coaching. She has been a key influencer for ethics and compliance leadership. Her role as a coach for legal and compliance team has been an important aspect that has enabled strategic thinking for ethics and compliance leader, if I may so say so. She brings in critical thoughts around leadership influence to drive compliance and creating stellar engagement across levels. Amii will share insights regarding strategy and ethics and compliance having a seat at an organizational level strategy. Amii, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Sundar. Thank you for inviting me.
Fantastic. So, Amii, I just wanted to jump onto the first point. This year has been really challenging, so to say, and not just for ethics and compliance officers, but also for organizations. Organizations have to rebuild, re-strategize their business models and strategies. While ethics and compliance officers have been involved in crisis management strategy, I just wanted to ask, on the other side, is ethics and compliance and strategy an important aspect to look at? And how do you see ethics and compliance officers using strategy to get a seat at the table?
I think it's a critical part of strategy. As you've mentioned and alluded to, Sundar, in times of crisis, compliance and ethics needs to be present in the right way because there is a lot greater risk in times of crisis that with financial pressures on the bottom line, that there will be temptations to cut corners. And so compliance needs to be sensitive to the fact that everyone is feeling pressure, particularly sales, I would say, who carries the weight of the P&L on their shoulders. And so this is when your relationships really come into view. And hopefully all of our compliance and ethics officers and general counsel have been investing in relationships over time, because this is not something that you can suddenly just turn a switch on and have the influence you need. So my hope is, and I know many of my coaching clients work very diligently to make sure that they are constantly nurturing those stakeholder relationships that are critical in importance, such as supply chain, such as audit, HR. Right now, facilities is usually leading the pandemic work from home and return to work response plan, depending on the industry that you're in. Of course, certain industries have never slowed down, such as manufacturing facilities or distribution centers. They've had to ramp up, or hospitality. So new compliance regulations around healthcare and return to work for employees, as well as for external customers, depending on what your product or service is, has been paramount. And so my hope is that compliance has done the work and is doing the work to stay relevant and to demonstrate how they'll add value, because the other thing that we know happens, at some point, we will be on the other end of this crisis. I hope soon, but we don't quite know yet. It could be a year before we really start to feel that we're on the other side of a curve with either herd immunity or with a decent vaccine that's distributed well and appropriately. And until then, compliance needs to be thinking, as I think we always do if we're strategic, 2 or 3 years ahead, which is when enforcement actions come in and happen, whether it's anti-money laundering or FCPA, on how we've been conducting our sales activity, particularly for global companies. So that's where I think compliance really needs to be strategic, is really investing in those relationships and being at the table when new products are delivered, when new sales strategies are being talked about, so that they can be thoughtful and strategic reminder of the entire business cycle and how we need to care about the end as much as the profit-making piece.
I completely agree with what you say, Amy. Incidentally, one of the recent podcast series that we did, which compiled insights from leading legal practitioners, anti-corruption practitioners across the globe, also brought out the same view that there's going to be increased enforcement post the pandemic, right? And I completely agree with the perspective that you're saying is also that compliance officers need to be strategic about thinking about what would happen 3 years from now. And that brings to the next question, is that currently at this point in time, business leaders are completely involved in managing crisis and enhancing their revenue book, right? At this point in time, what is that you see ethics and compliance officer shall do or structure a strategy as to influence them?
In terms of how to best influence.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is important. I wrote a recent piece for SCCE on this around how to make sure that your voice is still getting heard during a very noisy time. I'd say one thing, in the virtual environment, which most of us are, and most of my clients are having board meetings virtually, executive team meetings with travel restrictions and lockdowns, which I expect will continue to get more severe as, at least in the United States area, winter comes for us, and states where winter is coming, I expect we may have more lockdowns. It's really important to make sure that you're influencing and staying in touch with people as much as possible. I would say that, I usually suggest that my clients go on a listening tour if they haven't. Make a list. One exercise is to make a list of 3 to 5 of your key stakeholders that you need to get your job done well, and that are key areas that control things such as workforce culture. Again, we've talked some of these, where the supply and following the money is going, and ask them what their biggest challenge is, how you can help, and what one thing can you do to be more effective in your job from their perspective, and just listen. And if you do that with 3 or 5 people, Sundar, you'll get a pretty good strategic plan together around how are you doing? Do you have the influence you need? Are you putting your effort towards where they think you should be putting your effort? Now, you may not agree, and you don't have to agree, but understanding that perception is just as critical to influence as what you think in your strategic role, because you may realize that you've missed some things, or you may realize that you need to work on educating, because perhaps the perspective of what they have of what your role is actually different than what you think of, and you need to negotiate there a bit. I find that we can get very siloed in compliance and ethics if we don't ask those types of questions and really know our business well. The compliance officers should, I feel like this is obvious, but compliance officers should know their businesses just as well as salespeople know their clients. These are our internal clients. So we should know, what are the corporate goals sales is being asked to meet? How are they meeting them? Where is staffing being cut? And is it in a critical risk area? Do you need to then ask for audit support in looking at that process or whatever's been changed 3 to 6 months later? There are all kinds of changes being made with furloughs and layoffs. And we absolutely strategically need to know where those are happening. And the other thing I would say is we potentially need to do our share. I've had if people are making cuts across the company, the only exceptions I can think of is if you're under currently a corporate integrity agreement, you might have a monitor that would not bless having a staff cutback. But if you are not in that situation, and I hope you're not, you should be thinking about what are a few non-essential functions that we could just cut back on temporarily to demonstrate that we are in this with our company and that we understand and we're not tone deaf to the pain that everyone around us is feeling. I never suggest cutting talented people. As a former chief human resources officer, it's very hard to replace good quality people. So I would prefer to put off a nice to have project like upgraded training or an automated controls process. Perhaps there's something on your agenda, but then be smart about it. I had one client where they pushed something off into 2022, but they negotiated for an airtight agreement that it would be in the budget for 2022. They came to the table with that, Sundar, and the CEO and the CFO were extremely impressed because that felt like a business partner. That felt like, okay, they get the pain. They're thinking like a business person, not just like a lawyer, not just like a compliance person. And I think it made tremendous strides in terms of them being at the table.
Absolutely. And what is essential in this is to start with the basic empathy. You have that empathy and reflect that empathy of senior business leaders who are having their own struggles at this point in time.
Incredible pressure.
Absolutely. So if you are able to relate to that empathetically, you will be in a position to think of, go through a listening tour, understand their perspective, and try and alternate your approach towards that. That also leads me to another thing, which is at this point in time, while things are changing and things are extremely dynamic, you did suggest a couple of things as what a compliance officer need to do. But are there any specific suggestions that you have at this point in time in the year? And whether it is in terms of managing costs, influencing relationship, being a true business partner in that sense?
I would be thinking out. One of my favorite quotes is Wayne Gretzky. He's a former famous hockey player. And he says, I want to always skate to where the puck is going to be. And I love that as an analogy for all of us in compliance and ethics, because I think that's what we are always aspiring to do with our programs and with our policies and our training and our thought leadership is we want to be where the next crisis is going to be. So the silver lining, I think, for all of us in compliance is that we're actually very good at crisis. Most of us in our roles get that sudden whistleblower action or, a letter from the DOJ or, a really difficult investigation or a new law that is passed that we need to think about how are we going to change our business processes to comply with this. So I think I think we've got this. It's just a question of clear thinking, empathy, as you've pointed out, for colleagues, because they may not have the gravitas. They may have difficult situations. The other thing that we've seen as a theme in this pandemic trend, unfortunately, is the increased stress and the complete eradication of professional and personal boundaries. Children coming in and asking what's for lunch, for breakfast, or a dog barking, or people not having a good workspace to be in. And so we need to kind of think about all of those things that may be putting our colleagues not at their best. And if we can be someone who is centered and thoughtful and listens, again, even if we don't agree, you can always come back to the person later. I find that just goes miles right now.
Yeah. So if I take a cue from that, what you're basically saying is invest in relationship and look at it from the perspective of how your colleagues who matter for you to run an effective ANC program are looking at things, right? So that's a fantastic theme and a fantastic reflection, Amee. And I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation and then exchange notes on something which is very, very important for current times. I really thank you for contributing to this. I look forward to engaging with you again soon.
Thank you for inviting me, Sundar.
Thanks. Take care.